As 3D modelers, our main job is taking these very complex shapes like a train and distilling it down into a whole series of very simple, basic shapes. Basically every object inside of our entire world can be distilled down into very simple shapes. If you think about it, a car is nothing more than a really fancy box with 4 cylinders associated with it. A train, same thing. We got some boxes and a whole bunch of cylinders. Circles and squares are really the majority of the shapes that we're going to be focused on initially. Of course, we're naturally going to go in and begin to edit those simple shapes and transform them into something that's logarithmically more complex than what we began with. But the first thing that we should be doing is deconstructing our reference images and trying to figure out the simple shapes that we can very quickly create. Now, in every sense, the reference image that we're using here was initially created with exclusively simple shapes. So just, a whole bunch of cylinders and spheres. That's it. So what we need to do is use our basic shape creation tools to go in and create a whole series of simple shapes quickly. Let me show you what we're working with or how we're going to do that quickly inside of Modo. Before we get started, just note that I'm viewing my scene from the right orthographic view, and I'm currently working inside of the empty mesh item. And let's be good stewards of our scene and name my mesh item. Let's just call this train. I don't like to work on mesh items whose names are just mesh. It doesn't really give me a good visual understanding of the role of that mesh item inside of our scene. Now, as we've explored in previous videos, we can create very basic simple shapes with these tools up over in here. Now, we were making unit primitives, so true 3-dimensional pieces of geometry here, but often really where we should begin are basic shapes, basic simple shapes. We don't necessarily need to make 3D shapes initially. Of course, you're more than welcome to, but for me, I like working in 2D for as long as I can because it's a little bit easier for my brain to decode and understand specifically the forms and the spatial relationships that I'm creating inside of the scene in front of me. So I'm going to just fire off the cube tool here. And I'm going to focus my attention just on this coal car here in the back. Because as you can see, really this coal car is 3 cubes and 5 separate cylindrical pieces. Now with the cube tool activated, I can left click and drag and draw out a cube. There we go. Now when I mouse up, I'm left with these action handles inside of my 3-dimensional scene, which is pretty cool. Of course, these little guys on the outside, the blue squares and the green squares, are going to allow me to change that shape before I go too much further. Awesome, pretty cool. And then, of course, the handles in the center will allow me to move and position this shape where I want before I go too much further. Now, I'm of the modeling thought that we should try to initially place and create these shapes in their final resting position or as close to their final resting position initially. That's just, it saves us some clicks, it saves us some edits later on down the line, and it helps us get a better understanding of how all of these pieces are going to work together at the end of the day. So there we go. Now, like with every other tool, at the moment that we're done with it, we need to deactivate the tool. We need to turn it off. So tapping the space bar will allow us to very quickly turn off the tool and round out that tool's moment inside of our scene. Now, I'm going to do something here. I'm going to turn on, I really can't see that geometry in reference to the backdrop item itself. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hit with my cursor in the viewport, hit the O key. I'm going to turn on overlay drawing, and then under the background imagery section in the drawing and control tab, I'm also going to turn on overlay, and there's my geometry. Awesome, looking pretty fantastic. This is exactly what I want. Awesome. And we can see that thing is pretty much dialed. So let's do a couple more here. Let's go back into our right. And once again, let's just fire off a little simple cube tool. Now, I'm trying to keep this as basic and as simple as I can. Initially, when I'm fleshing out the details of a model, I want to keep it pretty simple. I don't want to try to confuse my brain with the complexities of all the bevels and the fine details of my shape initially. I want to return to how my brain kind of consumed shapes when I was in kindergarten, when I was working with wooden blocks or with Legos for that matter. 3D modeling, if we begin there, is a little bit easier. We're just stacking pieces on top of each other. Now, you can see that I've made some mistakes over here, but that's okay. Because, maybe I just initially created this thing in the wrong position, but that's okay. I can always go into my component selection set, find the element that I want to move, which is that one right there, and just move that element up and down. Same with this one. Looks like it's a little too long. So I'll fire off the move tool, which is the W key on my keyboard, and I can very quickly get to the final the final shape that I'm after, and that's close enough for me. You know, if you go in too close, you're gonna start fooling yourself onto the placement of this stuff. But that's pretty cool. The aliasing in the image itself is going to present some visual challenges, so don't work too close to the model. Let's do it one more time. So 3D modeling begins and ends with the creation of very simple shapes and forms. This allows us to focus on the basic properties and the basic planes, if you will, that this train is made up of. There we go. I'm looking pretty happy with that. And then finally, I'm going to use the cylinder tool to very quickly flush out the wheels themselves. Now, making perfect circles inside of Modo is not difficult at all. You just want to make sure that the radius value for 2 of these values down in here, 2 of the 3, are the same. Now, I'm just going to, excuse me. Let me hit undo here. Excuse me. I just monumentally screwed that up by hitting the wrong key. There we go. Awesome. I'm going to drop the tool. And the cool thing about working with these basic simple shapes is that I can continue to refine their size. This guy may be too big or too small, so I can scale it up or scale it down just to get the perfect shape that I'm after before I really commit to it. And I'm happy with that. I continue doing that for the rest of these. So, you know, 3D modeling is all about simple shapes. It's all about using these tools over in here to very quickly flush out what our train is ultimately going to look like at the end of the day. Now, here in this section, it's a little bit more of a challenge. Now, you're probably asking yourselves, well, how am I going to create the openings here? Well, think about it. If this was Legos, how would you make an opening with wooden building blocks or with Legos? You really have a whole series of what would be probably 6 separate cubes here, or 5 separate cubes, excuse me. So I'll have a cube down here to define that section. Drop the tool. I'll have another cube up in here to define the top. Maybe like that. There we go. And 3 other cubes in here to create the openings for the windows. Something right around in here like that. And there we go. The basic shapes that will allow us to very quickly and very accurately get the shapes, the model that we're after. Let me zoom over into perspective here, turn off my backdrop item, and there it is. You can see the underpinnings of my train unfolding in front of us, which is very, very cool. It's all about finding and deconstructing a very complex image into a whole series of simple images. If we begin this way, the process of creating very complex 3D models begins with a very, very simple shape deconstruction.